Hello, welcome to this game review. We'll have a look at a game where Black soundly outplayed his opponent, though eventually the game ended in a draw because of a very bad exchange in the end game. Very bad decision by Black. So let's take a look. So it started as an Alapin. Black played basically the main moves. Takes, d6. Of course, White can't really hope for much advantage in the Alapin, but at the club level it's quite often played. Though here seemingly White didn't really know the theory, and in this mainline position, and bishop b5 was played, which doesn't really make much sense. There is not really much use in the spin at this point, and also Black just noticed this easy tactic winning a pawn, which is queen a5, so the bishop just became a target. Usually bishop c4 was played, and in this position there's many moves for Black. There's e6. The main line is knight b6. One simple line to play is maybe taking here and knight b4, which usually will gain a good endgame with a weakness on e5 for Black. So there are many ways to play the Alapin. Here, Black's knowledge wasn't really tested. Queen a5. White has to play knight c3, as otherwise the bishop is lost. And Black takes, White has to take here. And eventually Black just wins a pawn. Bishop d2, and queen d3 is the most ambitious, not allowing castling, keeping the queen in a good position. And at this point, Black is not really well developed, but neither is White, so he cannot really use his small lead in development. So Black is basically a pawn up for nothing. Also, he has the bishop pair, White's king is stuck, so he just has to castle, and he will be basically winning in the whole game. So rook b1 was played. Bishop goes to a6, which is fine. Bishop e3. So Black just exchanges queens, then there's no reason not to. Then plays g6, which is perhaps a little bit slow. There's no real reason to fianchetto the bishop here. Black can just play e6, put the king on d7, eventually develop the bishop either somewhere or just e7, take the b file, maybe put the bishop on d5. There's many plans. Black is just a pawn ahead with the bishop pair as well, and White's pieces are also quite bad. So there's no reason that the Black shouldn't win this game. But okay, g6. Now the problem is that his king got in some danger and White's bishop got some scope. And now the matters are not as clear. King d7, bishop f6. So Black didn't even get a chance to fianchetto. So whenever we play g6, we should at least be able to calculate until here and see that there are some problems. If we fianchetto after the check, the e7 square is quite weak. King d7, bishop f6, rook g8 here, h6, rook b3 was played. White could again gain some counterplay with d5. If Black takes, then maybe even h4 to stop g5, or just knight d4. And White has some kind of a interesting bind on the position. It's not clear how Black will develop here, and White can almost be equal. But after knight b3, rook b3, g5 is a nice move, developing the rook like this. And here, rook g6 is a big blunder, because Black had the great chance to put his bishop on this diagonal. And if he puts his bishop on e6, then White will have no counterplay whatsoever on the the e file, and also the bishop can even go here if needed. So Black is just completely winning if he finds bishop c4. But the original plan was this. But this allows bishop e7, which at least gives White some counterplay. For example, after this, the nice move bishop takes g5, with the idea to go to e7 and then win the rook on a8, which is quite important. And here, this was White's only chance, that this wasn't found. Bishop to h8. And now rook e6, which apparently is a mistake, but it makes sense to exchange pieces. Again, bishop c4 was very simple and good to put the bishop on d5 or e6, and this bishop might even get stuck after an f6 or just trading. But here, Black continued to be winning. He finished his development eventually. Here, after d5, Black could just take the bishop. It's hard to understand why he didn't. There is something small to calculate after taking here. Of course, we don't give the bishop back so easily. We can just play king d8, after c7, king d7, and the game is over because everything controls c8. Black is just a bishop up, so it's really hard to understand why black didn't just take the free piece. Probably he didn't look for captures. He took on d5, which of course gives black a winning position as well, but if we can take free pieces, we should. Here bishop d4, bishop d8, which is fine, trying to get rid of some pieces again. And here white should just exchange, he should take on h6, gaining some counterplay. And white is close to losing again, but there's not much else to do. After bishop c4, for example, likely the game will end in some rook endgame where black will be a pawn or two ahead. Knight b3, bishop c4 is a nice move, bishop e3. Here white plays d4, which is the first kind of strange decision, but I guess he wanted to exchange this pawn for a2, which is fine. Probably he can just trade here, maybe even go for the rook endgame, where he is 2 pawns up. He can even play the passive move rook h8, but this kind of makes this rook useless, and it should look for other ways to play. And black has a lot of ways to improve his position. Eventually he will bring the rook back, maybe exchange one pawn, and generally rook endgames with 2 pawns up are simply winning. d4, and here the terrible decision is bishop takes d4, exchanging into an endgame with opposite colored bishops, in which the number of pawns becomes not the most important factor, but the most important factors become passed pawns and also king safety, and black's king is not much safer than white's, so there's no reason to go into this endgame. Black had a very simple win with taking on a2, and then just pushing his a pawn, trying to create a queen. And the white is not in time with his pawns here. Black has the bishop pair, so it makes sense that he is faster in most operations. So this is quite incomprehensible. There's no reason to give up the bishop like this. This is a huge blunder, and black should try to understand what his idea was. Here, of course, black is a little bit better, and he can try to push, but he plays rook e8, which is very hard to understand, just giving up this pawn in one move. And again, this is something for the player with black to try to think about. Of course, black has the passed pawn, he should just push it. There's no real science behind this, just push your passed pawn, hopefully get it to a2, and then maybe put the rook on b1. Black is a pawn ahead, after all, he should try to win. After this, white simply takes, and white has no problems whatsoever. So here the game ended in a draw eventually, as it should have at this point. But yeah, it's hard to understand these last decisions by black. So, and I don't think it's very difficult to see that in general, exchanging into opposite colored bishops is not a good idea if we're in a winning position. And also this rook e8 move, just leaving the pawn to be taken, is also not great.